Today, we are joined by Julie Stein. Ms. Stein is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network, an initiative for certifying rural enterprises that assure people and nature coexist. Thank you, Julie, for joining us today. We are so happy to have you with us again. So without further ado, I will get right to the first question. Can you tell us a little bit more about how wildlife-friendly certification helps communities achieve their ideas of well-being?
Thank you so much for including me this year, and I'm so sorry not to be able to be there in person, but very happy to be able to participate this way. So my organization is the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. We are a certification program, but we really use certification as a tool to both get conservation done and to support community livelihoods and community well-being. So I really appreciate this question. And so while our branding, sort of focuses on the wildlife aspect for consumers, human communities have always been very equal in that scale for us. And so one of the things we do, we recognize that both people and wildlife need to survive and thrive in these high biodiversity landscapes, and that people really these local communities hold the future of wildlife in their hands, and they're really taking all the risk by living next to wildlife. Often consumer agricultural products are far away in urban centers and don't necessarily understand all of the issues that rural communities are facing. So what we do is try to give wildlife a value while it's still alive for local communities, and make sure that's really transparent, that any benefits or increases that they perceive in their well-being are tied to wildlife alive rather than, for example, being sold for their parts in the illegal wildlife trade. And we do this by creating incentives and letting global consumers and companies carry some of the risk for those communities living next to wildlife. Sometimes these benefits or increases in well-being from being part of our network and certified by us sometimes they're a premium on the price of the product. Sometimes it's in gaining access to new markets. Sometimes it's in consumer loyalty over a long time because they appreciate the stories behind these products. Sometimes the NGO that is local and supporting that community is able to provide improved infrastructure or training, sometimes training for diversification of income, which, as we know, is really important these days. And in other cases, they might be able to help with complementary certifications like organic practices, for example. And all of this really helps with human and ecosystem health and resilience, which in this time of climate change and COVID is so important.
Thank you, Julie. That was very eloquent. So what do you consider to be the pillars or prerequisites of human and ecology interdependent sustainability?
So we're involved in some initiatives right now that maybe I'll touch on a few of those because they are also our pillars. We really need to move beyond the do no harm approach and towards a nature positive approach. Today, I'm in the US, and today happens to be what we call Black Friday here in the US, and it's really sort of an ode to consumerism. And that's okay. Consumerism is a reality in our world. It's sort of what makes the world go around right now, and it's inevitable. But we really want to think about envisioning a world where each thing we buy is leaving the world a better place instead of doing harm. And instead of just doing no harm, we want to move beyond that. We want to reach beyond that because we have to at this stage, both for climate and the biodiversity crisis. And I don't know about in India, but in the US, the word regenerative, it's sort of being used a lot, and there are a lot of competing definitions. So it's hard to know if you're talking about the same thing these days when you use the word regenerative, almost like the word sustainability. It's a little vague, but we do need to look at practices that regenerate and sustain our resources rather than degrade or destroy them. We're looking at circularity and closing loops in production And of course, giving our work a little plug, wildlife friendly approach, organic production wherever there's agriculture. And this is really important because agriculture covers over a third of the Earth's surface, land surface now. So it's both one of the biggest challenges and biggest opportunities for biodiversity, which of course is our focus. And we when I say biodiversity, we're really biodiversity is essential for human survival. So we're really talking about biodiversity writ large. So that includes all the ecosystem services that humans depend on: pollination, clean air, clean water, fertile soil, all those things that we also depend on for our survival. So when I say biodiversity, I'm including humans in that biodiversity. And I just wanted to touch on one more thing, because I know Naturenomics is one of Balapara's pillars, as it is ours. And one of the new tools that's out there thinking about business and the role that business might play in meeting the global goals for nature, and how companies can start engaging and where companies should start. There's some new tools, and one of them is the science-based targets for nature, which are initial guidance for business on biodiversity and really emphasizing a no regrets approach. So acting even if we don't have full information, and taking a precautionary approach so that actions taken by business are erring on the side of protecting nature and communities. I'm including communities in that nature definition. So the shorthand are the SBTs, the science-based targets, and these are actionable. And there's a framework, it's called AR3T, and that stands for avoid, reduce, regenerate, restore, and transform. So this is really a framework that can help businesses start doing the actions that they want to take, and then eventually start thinking about measuring those. But you don't need to be able to measure to start thinking about acting. So I just wanted to touch on those in case they're not well known to the Balapara audience. It's still in development, but if you Google science-based targets for nature, you can see the framework that's starting to be developed. It's very interesting, and it might be something of interest for people listening.
That does sound very interesting. And while you were speaking about how these systems are interdependent, so my next question would be that while holistic interdependent ecosystems are the natural way of being, but there are challenges that come across in maintaining a model that is concentrated on well-being of all, right? We are often told that the well-being of one aspect of life must come at the cost of another. And your model proves that's not correct. So that varied systems can exist and benefit from one another. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. There are always trade-offs, and sometimes the trade-offs are tough. That being said, early in my career in conservation, I had somebody interviewing me for a job who told me that there was no such thing as a win-win in conservation. And I am a stubborn person. When he told me that, I think I set out to prove him wrong, which has sort of become our work with Wildlife Friendly. And so not only are we looking for win-wins, we're looking for win-win-win-wins. We're looking for, the community to benefit, the landscape to benefit, biodiversity to benefit, and companies and consumers to benefit. So that's a high bar. And in reality, there will be some trade-offs, but one of the things we need to think about is sort of, instead of seeing a pie and cutting it in half and saying wildlife gets half, we need to start looking at where the overlaps are and really expanding the pie. So there's common ground always, and that's one of the things we need to look at, so that when we do make trade-offs, they're the best possible trade-offs. Just going back to agriculture as one example, since it is sort of the frontier for, I think, wildlife and communities going forward, because we've got our protected areas, we've got our urban centers, but in between that, we've got this matrix of agriculture, and somehow that agriculture has to both feed 8 billion people and support biodiversity and ecosystem services and make sure communities can have livelihoods. So I know there's this conversation going on right now, a discussion about whether we should be doing land sharing, so where wildlife and human communities are sharing the landscape, or land sparing, where agriculture sort of gets more intensified and concentrated and high yield, so that then we can have these ecological set-asides with no agriculture. I think from my perspective, it's not an either or decision, it's a both and, that we really need to do both, and that each particular site will sort of, once you dig down to see the ecological and social context there, will tell you what needs to happen on that site. So whether you're talking about this 30 by 30, which is protecting 30% of the planet by 2030, or 50 by 50, which is a much higher bar, we need to protect the best and improve the rest. And we need to do that as quickly as possible. So I think because of where the world is right now, you know, yes, there will be trade-offs, but we need to make the smartest trade-offs we can. I guess the other thing is, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is that we all are climate refugees now, basically. And so we all need to move to survive, and that's people and wildlife. So there are going to be winners and losers for people and wildlife. Going to be some serious environmental justice issues over land tenure, and you know, as with climate changing, where people can actually still live, where wildlife and people can actually still live and survive. So if you can't move, there are maybe dire consequences. And so that's another one of those examples where we can't really, the trade-offs are too serious. So we've got to find a way to expand the pie and avoid those trade-offs. And all of this, I guess I need to acknowledge, is going to require big shifts. It's no longer business as usual. This is going to, the future is going to require transformational change, because change is going to be really the only constant in our life right now. I was listening to an Israeli historian, his name is Yuval Noah Harari, and he was saying one of the most critical skills we're all going to need looking ahead in the future is to be able to reinvent ourselves over and over again, and not only to learn things, but to unlearn things that we already know. And that really hit me. I think it's true, and it's going to apply to us as individuals, but also to our organizations and to brands, business, and everybody. So I'll just pause there, but I think that's an important message that we all need to think about going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of our audience would actually relate to what you said about Yuval Noah Harari, because I think that's one book that everybody, that's kind of the book of this century. So I think that's a very nice note to end on. So thank you. We only have time for that for now. Thank you so much for joining us this year, and we hope to see you again next year.
Thank you so much. And hi to all my friends that I hope are in the room, and maybe next year I will be able to see you in person. Take care and be safe, everyone.